"If you don't like that I'm sleeping with your friends, you can leave," Claire said. Lifting her jaw, the laughter around our anniversary table came out thin and nervous. 3 men I had trusted for years stared at their plates. Claire leaned closer and whispered, "Don't make a scene tonight. Behave for once." I looked at the glass she had personally carried over from the bar. That was the part she thought I hadn't noticed. I had. And when I raised it, the same faint medicinal bitterness I had smelled weeks earlier hit me again. So while everyone turned toward the cake, I quietly switched my glass with hers. Claire never saw it. She took a long drink. I lifted the untouched replacement. Then I looked at the woman I had been married to for 20 years and realized that whatever she had, my name is Donald Hall. I'm 45, and for most of my marriage, loyalty was the one thing I never. Claire knew that. So did my friends. I had helped some of those men through layoffs, loans, divorces, and emergencies. Claire had spent yeeted like family. That night, everyone kept calling us the perfect couple. 20 years, someone shouted, glasses clinked. Claire smiled for the room, kissed my cheek, then murmured, "Try not to ruin this." I said nothing. For weeks, I had been waking after dinners feeling confused and unusually exhausted. Sometimes entirely, Claire always blamed alcohol. "You had more than you remember." I rarely drank much. That was why the bitter smell mattered. Later, after Claire publicly admitted she was sleeping with my friends, I stood from the table. "All right," I said. That was it. No shouting, no threats. I walked out while everyone stared after me like I had finally been defeated. By 7:13 the next morning, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Claire was in the hospital, so were 3 of my closest friends. Several other anniversary guests had also been admitted with identical neurological symptoms. Messages started flying. People were already asking whether I had done something. Then a detective called. "Mr. Hall, preserve every bottle, glass, and medication from last night." I tightened my grip on the phone. "What did they find?" He paused. "The toxicology reports are coming back with the same substance in every patient." By the time I reached the hospital, 2 detectives were already waiting near the emergency entrance. One of them approached first. "Donald Hall." "Yes, Detective Mason. We need to ask you a few questions." I expected that. He studied my face for a moment before nodding toward a quieter hallway. "Walk with me." As we moved away from the waiting room, I could hear anxious voices echoing through the corridor. Claire's parents had arrived. One of my friend's wives was crying. Nobody had any answers yet. "Tell me about last night," Detective Mason said. "I drank 1 glass of champagne." "You're certain?" "I'm positive." "You argue with your wife?" She announced to an entire banquet hall that she was sleeping with several of my closest friends. He stopped writing. "She actually said that? In front of everyone." He exchanged a quick glance with his partner. "Why didn't you react?" "I was more interested in leaving than arguing." Detective nodded slowly. "Fair enough." As he continued asking routine questions, my mind drifted back several months. It hadn't started with the anniversary. It had started with little things. After dinner parties, I'd wake up exhausted. Sometimes I couldn't remember driving home. Sometimes entire conversations simply disappeared. Claire always had the answer ready. "You were stressed." "Barely slept." "You're getting older." The strange part was that I almost never drank enough to explain it. One evening, I mentioned the memory gaps to an old college friend named Kevin, who happened to be a P. He frowned. "That doesn't sound like alcohol." "What do you mean? How often does Claire pour your drinks?" I looked at him. "Almost every social event." Kevin leaned closer. "Donald, repeated sedation can look exactly like intoxication." His words stayed with me for weeks. Instead of accusing Claire, I started paying attention. One Saturday afternoon, while she was at the gym, I opened a kitchen cabinet looking for coffee. Filled behind a stack of serving bowls sat a small amber prescription bottle with the label peeled away. When Claire came home, it was gone. The next morning, I bought 2 discreet security cameras. One overlooked the kitchen island. The other covered the liquor cabinet. I also began saving unfinished drinks after parties, sealing them inside labeled containers in a smile. If I was wrong, I'd throw everything away. If I was right, I'd finally understand what had been happening to me. Days passed. The cameras quietly recorded. Claire never noticed. Then one evening I reviewed the footage. There she was, standing alone in the kitchen before guests arrived. She looked toward the hallway, opened her purse, removed a small glass dropper, added several drops into the whiskey glass she always handed me. Then she stirred it with a smile before carrying it into the living room. I watched the clip 3 times. My hands refused to move. The woman I'd trusted for 20 years had been drugging me inside my own home. I copied every recording onto 3 separate flash drives. The next morning, I met with an attorney. I don't want to file anything yet, I told her. I just need these preserved. She watched the footage without speaking. When it ended, she looked up. Donald, whatever this is, don't confront her alone. I also delivered the preserved drink samples to an independent toxicologist for analysis. I need to know exactly what's in these. It may take a few days, he replied. I'll wait. Then I went home and acted exactly like I always had. Claire became even bolder. You've been forgetting things again, she laughed one evening while friends were visiting. One of the men sitting beside her smirked. You're slowing down, Dawn. I guess I am, I answered quietly. Claire reached over and squeezed my shoulder. You worry too much. The room laughed with her. I forced a smile. Inside, I was counting every lie. Back at the hospital, Detective Mason finished reviewing his notes. Before he could ask another question, a nurse hurried through the hallway. Detective, he turned immediately. One of the patients is awake. Happened. He says he remembers seeing Mrs. Hall alone at the Champagne station before the anniversary toast. Detective Mason's expression changed instantly. Take me to him. Looked back at me once before disappearing down the corridor. For the first time since the anniversary, the investigation had shifted away from me, but I could already tell it was about to uncover something far bigger than anyone expected. By noon, the story had escaped the hospital. Reporters were already gathering outside the banquet venue, and every local news station seemed to be multiple guests hospitalized after anniversary celebration. Unfortunately, another sentence always followed it. Husband under investigation. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Some calls were from relatives, others were from people I barely knew. A few didn't even bother pretending they believed I was innocent. Donald, one former coworker said, if you did something in the heat of the moment, you need a lawyer. I already have one. So, you did? No, I replied before ending the call. Hours later, detectives executed search warrants on both my house and the banquet venue. I opened every cabinet they asked for. Take whatever you need, I told Detective Mason. Got nothing to hide. Meanwhile, officers searched Claire's belongings at the hospital under a separate warrant. Word spread quickly through our social circle. The same people who had laughed at me the night before suddenly stopped answering reporters. Questioned several deleted social media posts praising Claire. Others simply disappeared. By late afternoon, Detective Mason asked me to accompany him to the banquet hall. I'd like you to watch something. Inside the empty ballroom, technicians had already collected glasses, bottles, and serving trays. A large monitor displayed security footage from multiple cameras. The venue manager folded his arms. Cameras cover every public area. Detective Mason nodded. Play the footage from the toast. Recording began, guests mingled, servers circulated through the room. Then Claire entered carrying 2 champagne glasses. The bartender pointed toward a tray. She shook her head. Got it. Audio wasn't clear, but her refusal was obvious. She walked directly toward our table. I watched myself accept the glass. Seconds later, everyone turned toward the anniversary cake as the lights dimmed. The detective slowed the footage. There. I calmly exchanged my glass with Claire's, nothing dramatic, no sudden movement, just one quiet switch while no one was paying attention. Claire picked up the other glass without hesitation. She drank first. The room fell silent. One investigator looked at me. Why did you switch them? I smelled something strange. You didn't tell anyone. Wanted to see if I was imagining it. Detective replayed the clip twice more. No one else touched those glasses. This only explains why your wife drank from your original glass, he said. It doesn't explain. Before I could answer, another detective entered carrying a folder. Interviewed every bartender. What did they say? Mason asked. They all told the same story. He opened the folder. Hall insisted on pouring the anniversary champagne herself. Staff were instructed not to touch. The room grew noticeably quieter. If the staff didn't prepare the drinks, Mason murmured. Then someone else did, I finished. The forensic team immediately sealed the remaining liquor inside evidence containers. That evening, Claire finally agreed to speak with detectives. She appeared tired but defiant. This is ridiculous, she snapped. Donald planned this. How? He switched our glasses to frame me. You prepare the champagne. I was just helping. Anyone ask you to? She hesitated. No, refused the bartenders. They were busy. Explanation sounded weak even before she finished saying it. Then 2 of the men she'd been involved with arrived separately for questioning. Neither knew the other had already spoken. One insisted Claire never touched the alcohol. Another admitted she personally poured every glass from the crystal decanter. Their stories directly contradicted each other. Outside the station, cameras captured every arrival. By evening, television commentators were openly debating whether I had cleverly staged the entire in more serious. Public opinion split almost perfectly in half. Then Detective Mason's phone rang. He listened without speaking. "What did they find?" another investigator asked. Mason slowly lowered the phone. The forensic laboratory finished testing the liquor. And it wasn't just champagne. He looked around the room before continuing. Compound inside the decanter matches residue recovered from medication bottles seized from Cly. Nobody spoke. The investigation had just changed completely. The next morning, detectives returned to my house with another warrant. This time, they weren't looking for glasses or liquor. They wanted every recording from the security cameras I had installed months earlier. I handed Detective Mason a small lockbox. "Everything's in there." He opened it. Inside were 3 flash drives, labeled by date. "You made backups." I didn't know how far this would go. He nodded. "Good." We sat in my living room while forensic technicians copied every file. The first video showed Claire standing alone in the kitchen before one of our dinner parties. She looked toward the hallway, opened her purse, removed a small glass dropper, added several drops into a whiskey glass. Then she carried it directly to me. The second recording showed the exact same routine 2 weeks later. Different gathering, different bottle, same target, me. Detective Mason paused the video. "Many recordings like this do you have?" 7. His jaw tightened. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. Meanwhile, search warrants executed on Claire's phone and laptop uncovered even more. Detectives called me later that afternoon. We recovered encrypted messages. Between Claire and who? One of the hospitalized men. The affair partner worked in the administrative office of a private medical clinic. He didn't prescribe medication himself, but investigators believed he had access to controlled Inven. One message read, *, he's starting to notice. * Claire replied, *, then I'll increase it before the anniversary. He'll sleep through everything. * Another message followed minutes later, *, just don't overdo it. * Claire answered with a laughing emoji, * relax. He'll only be groggy. * The detectives kept digging. Financial records showed repeated purchases of disposable glass droppers from different pharmacies. A small cash withdrawals matched surveillance footage from stores where Claire bought them. Nothing alone proved the entire scheme. Together, they formed a timeline stretching back several months. Later that day, the toxicology team requested another meeting. Dr. Simmons spread several laboratory reports across the conference table. The sedative concentration inside the decanter was significantly higher than what we found in your— "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means someone made a mistake." He pointed toward a highlighted section. Dosage was accidentally increased, so everyone who drank from it received the same contaminated mixture. Detective Mason looked at me. "And because you switched glasses, you never consumed it. I didn't poison anyone. You avoided becoming another victim." The first time since the investigation began, the room finally understood exactly what had happened. My quiet decision to exchange 2 glasses hadn't harmed anyone. It had simply prevented me from drinking what Claire had prepared. As investigators continued interviewing guests, more pieces fell into place. One of my longtime friends admitted something through tears. "I always wondered why Donald looked so exhausted after parties." Another lowered his head. Claire mixed every one of his drinks. Several spouses sitting nearby suddenly looked at their partners. "New," nobody answered. One woman stood up so quickly her chair crashed onto the floor. "You watched her drug him." Silence. Then another wife burst into tears. Within hours, marriages that had survived decades were collapsing inside police interview rooms. The affairs were no longer the biggest betrayal. The cover-up was— Late that evening, Detective Mason called. "We're preparing arrest warrants. For Claire and several others." Before officers could serve them, however, my attorney received an unexpected message. Claire wanted to see me. "Absolutely not," my attorney said immediately. "Alone." Meeting was arranged inside an interview room at the police station. A detective remained outside the glass. My attorney sat beside me. Before Claire entered, I quietly pressed the record button on my phone and placed it face down on the door opened. Claire looked exhausted. Gone was the confident woman who had mocked me at our anniversary. She sat down slowly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. "Donald." Her voice cracked. "It wasn't supposed to send anyone to the hospital." She buried her face in her hands. I only wanted to keep you quiet. Room went completely silent. Claire kept staring at the tabletop, refusing to look at me. I never wanted this, she whispered. I leaned back in my chair. Then tell the truth. She closed her eyes. It started months ago. My attorney said nothing. Neither did the detective watching through the glass. Claire finally looked up. You were beginning to notice the affairs. So you decided to drug me? She nodded once. I thought. If you kept doubting your memory, you'd never be able to prove anything. I felt my stomach tighten. 20 years I trusted you. I know. You let my friends laugh while they knew exactly what was happening. Tears rolled down her face. I thought I could control it. Couldn't. The recording captured every word. Claire admitted she had repeatedly slipped prescription sedatives into my drinks before parties, became off myself whenever I questioned her behavior. She also admitted that 2 of the men she was sleeping with knew what she was doing and encouraged each one of them had helped her obtain the medication through contacts at the medical clinic where he were. It was only supposed to make you sleep, she said. That night. Then what happened? I mixed too much into the decanter. Her shoulders shook. I was distracted, and I didn't realize everyone would drink from the same batch. Detective entered the room. Hall, that's enough. She didn't resist. As officers escorted her away, she looked back at me one last time. I'm sorry. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. Within days, the investigation reached its conclusion. The forensic laboratory confirmed that every hospitalized guest had consumed champagne poured from tea paired. My untouched toxicology report showed no trace of the sedative. The security footage clearly showed that I had quietly exchanged our glasses before the toast, but the prosecutors concluded exactly what Detective Mason had suspected. I hadn't poisoned anyone. I had unknowingly avoided becoming the primary victim. Searches of Claire's phone, financial records, and encrypted messages established a months-long pattern of the rings. The videos from my kitchen cameras matched the laboratory findings almost perfectly. Every piece of evidence supported the next. There were no gaps left to explain. Claire was charged with multiple offenses related to illegally obtaining controlled medication, admit others to conceal the scheme. The affair partner who had supplied access to the medication lost his professional position. Almost another accepted a plea agreement after admitting his role in covering up the drugging. Their careers ended long before the criminal cases did. The personal consequences came just as quickly. The spouses of the men Claire had been involved with filed for divorce after learning they had hid families that had spent holidays together stopped speaking overnight. The same friends who had laughed while Claire humiliated me suddenly began calling. Donald, we didn't know how bad it was. You knew enough, I replied. Another asked if we could meet. Owe you an apology, I answered calmly. You owed me honesty when it mattered. I never returned another call. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly short. My attorney presented the surveillance footage, toxicology reports, financial records. Preserved dry, there was little left to argue. The court found that Claire's deception and criminal conduct had irreparably damaged the marriage. Because every major financial record had already been preserved before the anniversary, my assets, and for the first time in months, I wasn't defending myself. The evidence spoke for me. Several months later, I carried the last box into a smaller house across town. It wasn't as large as the old one. It didn't need to be. The silence inside felt different, peaceful instead of suspicious. Kevin, the pharmacist who had first warned me something wasn't right, stopped by with coffee. You okay? He asked. I looked around the empty living room and smiled for the first time in a long while. I think I finally am. I rebuilt my life slowly. I found new friends who valued honesty over appearances. I volunteered with a local organization that educated people about coercive control, and the warning if sharing my story kept even one person from ignoring those same signs, then something good had come. People still ask whether switching those champagne glasses was my revenge. I always give them the same answer. No, my revenge wasn't making them suffer. It was refusing to become the victim they expected. 20 years of lies ended with one quiet decision. And when the truth finally stood on its own, I never had to raise my voice again. Asterisk, I walked away with my name, my freedom, and my future, and I never looked back.